Excited for shifting into our next talk as well. So moving out of cryptography, which is very objective, very mathematically based, of course, and moving almost 180 degrees out, we're going to be talking about cognitive bias, which is a very critical and a fantastically exciting subjective area. We're going to be here with Rick Holland. And Rick, I'm really excited to have here. For those of you that may not recognize the name, Rick usually is on my side of the virtual table, and he is one of the chairs of our Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit that we have, usually in January, early in the year regardless. And in his little the chat we were having earlier, Rick had said, wow, this is great. I don't really have to do anything. I just get to show up and talk, and then I'm good. In fact, Rick is so relaxed that just for the heck of it, he went ahead and did another talk at some other conference earlier today. So I know that you're saving the best for last. So we're glad that you went ahead and put it in that order. So you got warmed up, now you're ready to go. Rick brings a fantastic background of experience. I always like to see what our folks' origin stories are, because although he's currently serving as a CISO, everybody started someplace, and Rick and I share kind of a common thread in that we both kind of came out of the help desk tech support world in a few capacities. So really interesting to see where those trajectories go. So it's something that I hold dearly to myself as well. Rick also brings an analyst and an engineering perspective here, and I'm excited for this talk because as we're going through our work doing analysis in the cyber world, we are still at our core human beings, and human beings have bias. We are the parts of the equation that are made of meat, as I like to phrase it. And when we have bias, we need to be very careful about that, because if we don't counter that, if we don't identify it and then counter it, then it's going to affect the reliability and the trustworthiness of our results, of our reporting. And that's really not something that we can afford to do. Otherwise, it becomes a questionable professional product. So this is really important stuff, especially when you're starting out, because I remember when I would start with investigation work and you'd be like, I know the answer is blank. I know this is what happened. And you have to very consciously dial yourself back off of that preconceived notion, because it is the result of bias, and then get to that seeking of truth. So without any further delay, I'm very excited to provide for you the your second talk for the day in your relaxing speaker role. And only thing I'll mention is I think you've got your slides flipped. If you can do your swap displays, we've got your full screen now. And
work. All right.
You're golden, sir. Welcome, welcome. And I cede the floor to you and look forward to this.
Cool. So yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I was hanging out on Amy Baitlet's talk on Intel because I'm an Intel geek. So I popped on just a few seconds ago. I'm also a Marvel geek as well. I did a short poll in my Slack channel in the hallway to see how many people had seen the Marvel movies. There was maybe 9 people that had seen it. So hopefully you guys will get some of my my references and jokes in this. A little bit about me. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Digital Shadows. I used to be the CISO at Shield, Hail Hydra. We had an insider threat problem there, so I ended up at Digital Shadows, which is basically a cyber threat intelligence company. I should say that because there's a bias there. I have the huge bias towards CTI, but what I'm going to talk about today goes way beyond CTI, and hopefully will help us just make better decisions in life and day to day as well. Here's all my stuff on the socials. Some folks were talking to me about Intel stuff in Amy's channel, so you can find me there. So who doesn't want to be better at decision making? I can't imagine anyone would say no, they don't want to be better at how we make choices. And it doesn't matter what role that you're in. You know, if you're operations, if you're policy, if you're leadership, if you're blue team, if you're red team, if you're purple team, all of it. Sorry, I'm bringing up, see if I can multitask at the same time. I'm bringing up the chat at the same time so I can see some of those. We all want to get better at decision making. And one of the things that keeps us from doing it is cognitive biases. And we're going to dig into that and define it as we go along. Before I get started, I'm going to use a completely not related to SANS or CTI or anything cybersecurity bias. I am totally biased towards barbecue. Although ironically, I don't eat meat very often, but when I do, it's stuff that I cook. Here I have just a semblance of maybe the past. It's probably some of the highlights over the past year or so that's out there. But I love barbecue. I'm based in Dallas. I'm a Texan, or got here as fast as I could. But I could have a bias. I could have a bias that says Texans make the best brisket. And if people out here, you're going to be all over the country and the globe as well, right? You have your own way of doing barbecue. So this would be a kind of a bias. I'd say it's actually confirmation bias to say, hey, because cattle are such a big thing, cows, we do the best thing here. This is actually brisket from one of our fellow speakers, Ryan Kovar, who spoke earlier today, one of his briskets. He's not really a Texan. We're hoping he leaves pretty soon, actually, if I'm being honest. But you could contrast this with this brisket. Now, if anybody's into barbecuing and stuff like that, you may be familiar with this, but this is one of our senators down here that put this brisket up proudly on Twitter over Christmas and got absolutely destroyed for it. Like, that is the most disgusting piece of meat I've ever seen. So kind of conflicts with the Texans make the best brisket thing here. It's actually one of the most politically divisive things that this senator has done, which is a pretty funny thing to say. So I don't think Texans make the best brisket. I'm pretty equal opportunity. Whenever I used to travel for work, I always like to enjoy barbecue and the way people cook meats with fire and smoke, no matter where they were in the world. But let's talk about the origin story of cognitive bias. It starts with these two gentlemen, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman's name might be familiar to you, and I'll mention that in a second. But they in 1982 they wrote this paper for the first time, and they did a lot of collaboration. From that time, Amos died many years ago, but in 2002 Kahneman received a Nobel Prize for his research in judgment and decision making under uncertainty. He attributed it to his colleague Amos, who had already passed away, but they had done a lot of great research here. Now, Kahneman's name might be familiar to you. He wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a bestseller. It's very popular. I actually would recommend it to you if what I'm saying resonates today and you want to dig back deeper into decision making and how to be better at it. This would be a good take home for you. But the way that cognitive bias is described is a systematic error that occurs when people are processing and interpreting things that affects their decisions and judgments, right? So there's actually hundreds of cognitive biases out there. And we're going to talk through just a few of them. This website, very well mined, digs into some in more detail. Actually, in my Slack channel, I pinned a PDF that I created that has every reference that I'm going to go through listed in here, just to make it a little bit easier for you, so you can get that in the hallway. But this is right. Our decisions and judgments are impacted by feelings that we have, assumptions that we make, and we want to try to minimize that. And it's going to be really important for you, again, no matter what role you are. It's not just a cyber threat intelligence kind of function. You could be presenting something up to your manager, on a team. You could be presenting something up to the chief information security officer on a team. You could be writing an assessment of a company that you've done work for, your own assessment as you grow into your career in the space. So we really need to try to be aware of these and eliminate them. The first one, and I would say it's probably the most common one out there, usually is at the top of the list whenever anyone talks about cognitive biases, is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically something that confirms your pre-existing belief. So if I had my pre-existing belief that Texas barbecue was the best in the world, and then I saw a Texan do their barbecue, I'd be like, yep, see, there's proof. It proves it. Meanwhile, you have that senator's slop that kind of disproves that, at least on an individual basis. Here's a good example as well that takes it out of the barbecue realm, right? There's so much rhetoric going on these days. The very first thing you go to on a search engine is something that literally agrees with whatever your position is. You should really be seeking sources from across the spectrum to minimize cognitive bias. So you should look at things from the left and the right to understand it. I like to look at US news reports, but also across the globe, Al Jazeera, Jerusalem Post, Financial Times, trying to get a lot of different perspectives on whatever these issues. I'm a national defense geopolitical geek as an ex-Army intel person. I've kind of carried that on, but you really want to have more than one link that you're going to for your news. Some more definitions on this, which I already talked through. Some of them, ignoring information that challenges your belief. It's almost like selective reasoning. You just black out this other stuff and only see the things that agree and make you feel right. So what I'm going to do, and this is where the Marvel stuff gets into it. So, we're in a pandemic. I had a lot of time on my hands of not traveling. So I rewatched the 23 Marvel movies over the past 6 weeks or so. My kids hadn't seen all of them, so they got to enjoy them as well. And what I did was I wanted to take some examples of cognitive bias, of poor decision making and things like that, and see how I could translate them into something that could help you in your career professionally and also help us all personally as well. So I'll dig into some of these in a little bit more detail if you haven't seen the Marvel movies, to expand on them a little bit. The first one. So this is from Avengers Endgame. So Tony Stark makes it back to the Earth. And basically what has happened is that Thanos has snapped away half of the universe's life. And he comes back and he's like, I saw this coming a few years back. I had a vision. I didn't want to believe it. Now it's true. We needed a suit of armor around the world. Remember that? And if you know the movie, what Tony did is he created AI to try to defend the world, but it just turned out as AI, Ultron in this case here, then tried to destroy the world. So Tony is kind of conveniently forgetting what he did years back that almost destroyed the planet, the entire planet, not just half the planet like Thanos did. And he conveniently forgot that. So he saw something in history. And then 5 years later, he saw something that supported his worldview, and then believed it. So that is a textbook example of confirmation bias. Another one. So here, this is Spider-Man Far From Home. So this is actually the most recent Marvel movie. So this is 2019. So it's been quite some time. But here, Peter Parker is introduced to Mysterio. And Mysterio says and tells him that there's multiple realities. And Peter's excited because there's a multiverse. Sorry, of course, someone starts mowing a lawn right in the middle of a presentation. Hopefully it's not getting picked up on the mic too bad. And Peter's excited about it. Now, me as a fan, I am super excited about it because you're probably aware that Disney bought Fox and got all of the Marvel properties that were Fox. So to me, I'm like, multiverse. What does that mean? It means the X-Men are finally coming to the MCU. I can see Logan, maybe a new Logan. Deadpool 3 is going to be coming. I was just so excited. And then if you watch WandaVision, then you're even more excited because Quicksilver popped on. You're like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. I want it to happen. It's going to happen. Meanwhile, it's just Ralph Bonner. So, Marvel tricked us out, made us think that it was the X-Men coming, and it turned out that it wasn't. So this was my own confirmation bias because I'm ready for the X-Men. Haven't seen a Marvel movie since 2019. Get excited about WandaVision showing this, and it's not the case. So I totally bought that hook, line, and sinker. And you can imagine if you're doing an investigation and you see something and maybe you want it to be a certain adversary or you want it to be a certain, I don't know, it's a certain type of malware or whatever the case may be. And then it turns out that it's not. So you really need to have an open mind and not take anything at face value. I'm still upset about this. I'm so ready for the X-Men to come. Another one, illusory superiority bias. For those that watch the movies, you might understand why I've made the text green here, but here's where people overestimate their qualities and abilities. This one is something we should never really do. Overestimate our own while minimizing others. It's just not a good way to go. I never want to be the smartest man in the room. Fortunately for me, I never am, but I want to have the smartest men, women, people on the team around me, because what happens is you turn into Loki. Now Loki, I'm pretty excited about because we're about to get his show in a matter of weeks. So I'm just going to check Q&A and make sure that make sure everything's okay. Loki's coming out, but you guys know, if you've seen the movies, Loki thinks quite highly of himself, right? You are all beneath me. I'm a god, you dull creature. This is from Avengers. And then meanwhile, the Hulk comes in and gives Loki his due, which my 6-year-old daughter loves this. This is her favorite scene in any of the Marvel movies. But you don't want to be this person in a room. You don't want to think that you're a better than anyone else, right? And this applies to all aspects of our life, not cybersecurity alone. But there are people that want to be the smartest people in the room, and at the sake of others, and it's just not something you want to do. Cultural bias is a really, really big one for our field. Cultural bias is basically, judging things that you see based on your worldview, your community, your society, your country, your culture, and then making opinions about others without having any actual experience with them. And I think this one is so important right now because of a couple of reasons. One, the world is flat. Many companies are global companies, so your peers are going to be from other countries. For example, I have part of my team is the threat intelligence team at Digital Shadows. There's 15 people. We have 6 different countries and about 15 different languages across those teams, and very different cultures. When I'm on calls at night with Singapore, it's different than when I'm on calls in the morning with the United Kingdom. Or Greece. I have one person on my security team that is based in Athens. So we really do need to think about other cultures and how we interact with them there. And then the other bit is if you're doing investigations, especially if you're working in the nation state realm, and Amy presented before at Dragos, they do a lot of work on industrial control systems and security there. Well, nation state actors are targeting that. So having understanding of those nations and how their cultures and their mores is really, really important. I know there were some questions around, hey, if I have language skills, or perhaps I studied a particular culture or have a degree in Spanish, whatever, those types of things can be very useful in cybersecurity and in particular threat intelligence. But a couple examples from the movies. This would be from Guardians of the Galaxy. This is Drax. And they're first getting to know each other. And the comment that Rocket makes is, or raccoon or squirrel, whatever you want to call him. But, his people are that culture, they're literal. Metaphors go right over his head. And then, of course, he says, nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it. So totally lost on him, this joke. And throughout the Guardians of the Galaxy shows, there are, things that he takes quite literally and misses. And I think this is really important too. Like, don't assume that another culture is going to understand what you're saying, or don't assume because another culture behaves a certain way that it is, tied to something that we would do here in the US if you're sitting in the US watching this. Another really good example from this would be Black Panther, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. This is the highest grossing of the Marvel films. But our favorite Hobbit turned CIA agent is telling, actually Gollum, so a lot of Lord of the Rings stuff going on here, that Wakanda is a third world country. He has a worldview that culture of Wakanda is a third world country. So if you've seen Black Panther, you then know this to be the case. It turns out Wakanda is the most advanced culture in the world at that time. So he had a preconceived belief that was very much untrue. And I think this is, again, when working with our colleagues that are international, when tracking threat actors that are international, we really need to have a good understanding of their culture. Automation bias. Automation bias is us favoring things that come out of automated decision-making systems. Here it's interesting. I kind of included this one because, well, one, there's a joke. Again, going back to Tony Stark, he wanted to have his AI to protect the world. Jarvis disappeared. Ultron came and then tried to destroy the world. Right now, in fact, you've seen it in, I think, Ryan Kovar's survey results. I think he had data science is an area that was hot in our space right now. And then in Amy's talk that was just right before this one, in the other track, she was talking about Intel teams needing data scientists on those teams. Having a Jarvis on a team is super helpful. I don't think you have to worry about your job going away to AI anytime soon. There's a lot of hype around this, and then you see vendors, unfortunately, a lot of cybersecurity vendors, are doing a lot of FUD around this. Certainly, we want to be more automated. We want to use more data science, and I wouldn't say most companies don't even use AI. You've got to be the cream of the crop there. So, as you're making your way into this career field, I wouldn't worry about AI supplanting your role. That's not where we are today. And I don't know, could be decades away, if ever. I'm a little bit skeptical of the human element ever going away in the types of things that we do. But you definitely don't want Ultron to be taking over our jobs. So those are the cognitive biases that I want to talk to. There's hundreds of cognitive biases. If you just went to Wikipedia, you would see tons that are out there. There's a lot that I didn't get into. Another one that's pretty common is mirroring. So it's a little bit related to some of the cultural stuff where you mirror the way that you think with others. There's also another very common one called anchoring. I just couldn't come up with a good example of anchoring from the movies, but anchoring is where you take the first piece of evidence and then you weigh that piece of evidence higher than others. So you could be doing an investigation and you see something that leads you on one path, and then you kind of stick to that path and you ignore subsequent evidence that you have. So there's a ton out there. If you go to the Verywell site that I have in my pinned in my channel, you will see you go there in cognitive biases, and there will be a long list of ones out there that you could dig into and do a little bit more. I'm going to transition away to what I'd kind of characterize as analytical pitfalls. A lot of examples of just bad analysis, and these things will all apply again to no matter what role you would have in cybersecurity. The first one is just taking something at face value. So here, the Mandarin. Now you probably have to be pretty good geek to get this, but this is Iron Man 3. The Mandarin is a terrorist. The Mandarin has these very well produced videos. He destroys Tony Stark's house. You're just like, oh my gosh, what is the Mandarin up to? And then later in the movie, you find out the Mandarin is really, I guess, a Shakespearean actor named Trevor, or called Trevor, if I wanted to say like our British colleagues would say, called Trevor. And he's not the Mandarin. He's drunk. And he's just making these videos on behalf of someone else behind the scenes. So if you were doing CTI and you were doing threat actor tracking and you're like, oh, it's this actor, turns out it may be someone else there. And so, especially if you get into the world of attribution, this stuff is really, really important. SANS has done a lot of stuff on attribution. Rob M. Lee, who was one of the authors for the 578 course, has done some stuff on it there. It's included in the course materials there as well. So don't trust what you see there. Kind of exciting thing, I think, is we just saw Tuesday of this week or Monday, they actually dropped the trailer for Shang-Chi. So we'll see the real Mandarin coming September 3rd. I can't remember the date for when this comes. So this should be a really cool one. And I also like Hong Kong Kung Fu. So this one kind of has a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon feel to it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this one. So again, let's go back to Spider-Man. Here we go, Mysterio or Quentin Beck. This one is another good example. So in the film here, if you haven't seen it, basically Spider-Man defeats Mysterio. However, Mysterio has these drones, he's taking pictures, he's projecting things, and he cuts out how he dies, if he really died. We'll see there, but blames it on Spider-Man. Like, Spider-Man attacked me for some reason. He's got Tony Stark technology. And then he doxes Spider-Man at the end of the film. And throughout most of this film, it's tough to know what the reality is. And I think actually this is something that's important to think about for defenders as we go on. If you've watched Infinity War, here in this one, we have another one. So here Thanos is killed by his stepdaughter, stolen daughter, however you might want to say. And you're like, wow, that's anticlimactic. And even Peter or Drax from the Guardians of the Galaxy team says, wow, that was easy. And you've got clapping in the background. But meanwhile, Thanos already has a reality stone, so he can bend reality. So it was all fake. It was all a charade. And I think this is an interesting one. If you are thinking about red teaming and you're getting into that side of the house, deception technology is growing. In fact, Chris Sanders here on the left has written an intrusion detection honeypots book. He's presented at the SANS Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit, which is one that I co-chair. He presented about 3 years ago, but he's a good dude. But you know, he's made it easy for people to understand how to roll out honeypot. So a honeypot is something that looks juicy, interesting to an adversary, and then you go after it, and you're interacting with, you know, a fake environment for, you know, for, in the simplest of terms that are out there. You can use canaries. This is an open source project here for deception, but deception is growing in enterprises. It's growing more in the larger enterprises who actually have the resources to focus on it, because a lot of smaller enterprises are still just struggling to have multi-factor authentication in their environments and things like that. But if you're doing pen testing, if you're doing red teaming exercises, it's possible, if you're going after a large bank, that you could be interacting with some sort of deception technology that's out there. So, you know, you can't trust everything that you see, because it could be the reality zone. It could be Mysterio, you know, fabricating the environment that you're working on. So hubris, you know, hubris is just something that none of us should have in our lives in general. To be honest, this is a hard one to pick out, because there is so much hubris in the 23 MCU films that are out there. You know, Thor, he's got all kinds of hubris. You watch Thor 1, just thinks the world of himself. Iron Man, Tony Stark's got a lot of hubris here as well. I'm going to start with our good doctor, Dr. Strange from New York. He is world-renowned surgeon, one of the greatest in the world. So much hubris, very much concerned about his reputation. He won't take cases on that he thinks he's going to have less of a chance of success. He's stacking the odds in his favor so that he keeps a perfect record on the surgeries that he does. But he meets the Ancient One, Sorcerer Supreme here, and she's training him, and he has gone to her because he's lost use of his hands, can't do this. And she's saying, your intellect is only going to take you so far. Silence your ego. And she goes on, right? Arrogance and fear keep you from learning. It's a barrier for him, and it's not about you. And I think this is really, really important from a couple angles. I think the arrogance bit, don't have arrogance in life. I know it's easier said than done, but we all know people that are arrogant, but that's not going to help you, win friends and influence people in your careers in cybersecurity. And then I think fear is another component. Don't be scared. I know I heard in Frank Kim conversation 2 or 3 presentations ago, imposter syndrome came up a little bit. I get scared still when I present. My second, as Phil said, this is my second presentation today, but I still get nervous when I present. So fear can be out there, and there's ways to overcome it. That I think is natural. I think arrogance is not natural. If arrogance is natural for you, that's not a good thing. So remember, it's not about you. It's about your teammates. It's about your organization. It's about the people that we're trying to defend, the people we're trying to learn from. Another one is, don't let your emotions get the best of you. And this is hard. I think this is a really hard one. I'm a very passionate person by nature, but I think being less passionate can be quite helpful at times. If we go here to Infinity War, here you have Peter Quill, who they're about to get the gauntlet off of Thanos. That's what Spider-Man's trying to do there. If they can get the gauntlet away, then he can't snap, half the universe away. Peter finds out that Thanos has killed his, I don't know if they were officially girlfriend and boyfriend. It's not really said like that, but his love interest in the film, Gamora. And he finds that out and basically ruins what they're doing. Thanos is able to keep the Infinity Gauntlet on and then go on to the Earth. And if Peter had just been dispassionate here, and made it through, he would have, the world would have been better off for it. Although ironically, because he did this, he ended up getting his his love back. So I guess it did work out for him. So, good for him, bad for the world. Another one in Thor throughout the films is a hothead. And here now Thanos has gone to the earth and he's snapping half of the universe away. Thor should have gone for the head. And Thanos tells him that. There's a couple observations that I have here. One, this was hubris. It's almost like Thor wanted to do a victory lap around him, like I got you, I killed you type of thing. He had a couple options. One is go for the head. But I think this kind of ties back to our adversaries. If Thanos is your adversary, if you're doing cybersecurity and Thanos is your adversary, you're going to want to know what his techniques are, his procedures, what he is up to. If you looked at MITRE ATT&CK and you looked at the framework and threat group Thanos, you would understand that if he snaps, I was going to say initial access. I mean, that's the destruction of the universe type of thing. Perhaps Thor could have gone for the arm and cut his hand off so that he couldn't have snapped, or gone for the head. But you do want to know your adversary. If you're doing eradication, you're doing incident response, there's an adversary in your environment, before you try to do your 100% eradication, you want to make sure that you understand the TTPs that they're using, where they're operating in your environment, because you may not clean them out completely. So understanding your adversary is also important. So don't have the hubris like Thor and want to, S-talk the adversary, and then also understand your adversary and do something that's actually going to be a good course of action against them. This was not. So another one, just because it's known and familiar does not mean it's safe. What got me thinking here was when I watched here, Thor again. Thor is featuring quite a bit here, is Ragnarok, which is actually one of my favorite movies from one of my favorite Marvel directors. He's done a lot of great stuff, especially with vampires, if I can continue to geek out with y'all. But here Thor sees his friend, fellow Avenger. He's so excited. He's a friend from work. And then the Hulk just charges at him. They have a 5-minute fight within the arena for the Grandmaster. And he thought he knew him and thought it was going to be safe, and it wasn't. And there's a couple things that I thought of when I saw this. One, it made me think of something from my day job. When we look at, we do quarterly statistics on phishing across Digital Shadows. And usually 60 to 70% of our phishing attempts are for our CEO. And I was talking to the team that investigates the phishing emails, and I was like, it would be very easy for us to be like, oh my gosh, here's another CEO phish, because most of them are clearly, opportunistic, poorly worded, blah, blah, blah. But if we just thought, okay, here's another one, we're used to it. What if we missed the main one of them is well crafted and we just assumed it was, low hanging fruit, opportunistic, and it wasn't? That could be a really nice initial access into our environment. Another one that I would say is if you are a defender and you're looking at eyes on glass, looking at alerts from your SIEM, security monitoring infrastructure. Oh, yeah, this is just a normal alert, or this is just a normal process. This is how this process always runs and things like that. The adversaries live off the land is what we call it, right? They're using the tools that we have in our environment to pivot around the environment, to elevate privileges, all that sort of stuff. So just because you expect to see it doesn't mean that it's safe. And this also ties back to the question everything. So I think this is a really, really good one for a lot of reasons for us, defending our environments. Lack of empathy. I just wanted to throw this one in because I think we could all use some more empathy, over the past 14 months. Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson here. I really love this quote. It's a good one. I don't judge people by their worst mistakes. Over the past 13 months, we've seen a lot of people dealing with the worst circumstances that any of us have dealt with in our lives, right? Direct impact to our families, our children, our parents, our siblings, that sort of stuff. So, people have been stressed. There's no doubt that I have responded in ways to people that may not have been the way that I would have done it in a non-pandemic. And then on top of that, you have our role in cybersecurity. That can be challenging there. It could be another level of stress. If you look back, especially over the past 5 months, starting from the SolarWinds intrusion in December, you've had SolarWinds, you've had Excellion, you've had Microsoft Exchange. Just this week, you had a Juniper VPN issue. All of these things are taking time. It seems like we are working more than we ever have before in the midst of a pandemic. People are going to make mistakes. So be empathetic to that. Your employees that we're trying to defend, I don't like to call them users, because a lot of times people in IT and security call them just like dumb users. They're our peers, they're our colleagues, they're doing something for the business. They're going to make mistakes. Oftentimes I blame the security function for enabling those mistakes because we don't have the right controls in place. People blaming the users or calling the users the weakest link really bothers me, because I think we need to be putting in transparent security controls that help our colleagues make the right choices. So we need to be empathetic with our peers and empathetic with our colleagues across the organization, not just the ones that are in the IT or in security department. So I really like this quote. I think it's good. Groupthink. So groupthink for me is another huge one. It's up there with confirmation bias. And it's particularly important for me because as I have a threat intelligence team, and on the threat intel side, especially, you don't want to have groupthink, but that applies everywhere. Let me just kind of go on and have an illustration, right? Here's everybody just going off the cliff. And I think this is great, right? Shut up, you're undermining the troops. But here's a group of people that have, or animals that are suffering from groupthink, and someone questions it, then it's like, nope, get in line, do what we do. This is not what we want to have in our team. And as I've been sitting through previous conversations this afternoon, I've heard diversity come up in several of them. And for me, diversity is probably one of the most important things to do for group, to minimize groupthink that's out here. This is the psychologist that coined it, and I link out to this as well, Irving Janis. But there's a lot of things that contribute to groupthink. Some of them are us as security leaders, need to be actively trying to minimize this. So what do you have in place? Do you have a culture that's open for dialogue and being challenged? Like, as a security leader, we should let people challenge us in our brainstorming sessions and stuff like that. Let us know from the top down, let the team know that it's okay to challenge. You have a different idea, you can bring that up. It's okay. It's not going to be minimized or scoffed at or have some kind of retribution. We should encourage it because it minimizes groupthink and makes us deliver better outcomes on whatever we're doing. Diversity to me is a really important one. It goes back to the culture as well. The more diverse the team is, the less groupthink you'll have. So diversity from, parts of the world that people are from, from the sexes that are on the team that are there, from the backgrounds. You don't just have to have a cybersecurity background or technology background or come from the military and have a military intelligence or cyber background in the military, right? We need people from across the realm. Amy was talking about journalists and having journalists on the team. We need as much critical thought and challenging in our teams as possible. And then fatigue I highlighted for a reason, because I feel like this has been the past 13, 14 months for us in cybersecurity. I mean, in the 5 years since the snap, Thor has kind of let himself go. Beard's not looking good. Doesn't look like he's washed his hair. He's asleep. He's drinking here. He's just let himself go. But I think for us in the space, the pandemic, SolarWinds, and everything that's happened there, and trying to get our teams to be remote working and try to enable them securely, it's just really been hard. I think this calls back to the empathy part. But the more fatigued that we are, the more groupthink chances there are, because you just be beat down and be like, yeah, okay, let's do this, because I'm too tired to have an alternate opinion. And I had an incident response background in the past, and I worked in a university, and we had work with law enforcement on an investigation, and we were working, long days for weeks and weeks at a time, and we had to set up shift work, and we had to have a time to stop grinding, because we recognized that we were just going to be so exhausted that as incident responders trying to, find the breadcrumbs in the environment to try to track down the adversary, we weren't going to have success. So we really need to be on the lookout for fatigue, and it's a hard thing to do. So that's up to us as leaders to try to minimize that. Like, for an example, on my team in the pandemic, we've done a couple free days off that had nothing to do with PTO or sick days. It was like a pandemic recovery day, just to help try to minimize fatigue and be on the lookout for emotional welfare of our colleagues. So some ways that you can overcome cognitive biases. One is structured analytic techniques. Now, this is not a cyber threat intelligence talk, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on it. I actually did a talk on this for the SANS CTI Summit 3 years ago. But here's kind of the godfather of SATs. I've linked to this PDF. It's on the CIA's webpage in my talk. But basically, structured analysis, sorry, it's been a long day of talking. Structured analysis helps us mitigate our cognitive limitations and pitfalls. And I highlight externalize here because what you're doing is you're taking the thinking that's going on in your head and you're capturing it someplace for other people to see. And it's also helpful for you because you can capture it and you can review it later when you're addressing the same types of issues and things like that. There are hundreds of structured analytic techniques. The SANS 578 course has a exercise on ACH, alternative competing hypotheses, which is one. It's a quite laborious one that's out there, but there are a ton of them out there. I'm not going to dig into them in great detail. I'm going to walk through one at a very high level, but I have a lot of references to do this. But it's a structured way to think about a problem to overcome some of the challenges that you might have with confirmation bias, anchoring, mirror imaging, those sorts of things. So the one that I wanted to highlight was key assumptions check. Key assumptions or assumptions in general, in any type of work that you're doing in cybersecurity, you're going to make some assumptions, be it you're doing red team work and you're making assumptions about your target, you're doing CTI work and you're making assumptions about your adversary, whatever the case is. In life, we make assumptions. So it's a really good exercise when you're making a decision, no matter what it is, to list out your assumptions. And that's what we're going to briefly walk through here. So I made up just something that I thought was kind of germane because of some of the headlines right now. But let's say a CISO of a financial services company, you'll have this kind of threat intel by news type of thing going on these days. You'll have Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they do an article about something. A CISO reads about it and has a question, and maybe it's just a quick question, or maybe it turns into something bigger. Like in this case, this CISO wants to know, the threat landscape for cryptocurrency. And oh, how I wish, having been in IT for 15 plus years, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin or Dogecoin back in the day. And now we've had an IPO with Coinbase as well. I mean, this is a very volatile area. But what are the threats on cryptocurrency? You have financial institutions that are looking to move into this space more. A lot of them do some stuff with blockchain anyway, so they want to have a threat landscape assessment. When dealing with the executives, there's just actually anyone. I think there's a great quote from General Colin Powell that he would tell his intel officers, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, and then tell me what you think. And being able to make it quite clear when you're communicating with people, this is kind of an objective fact. We can confirm this because we've seen this activity. Here's what we don't know. Now there's unknown unknowns, which are kind of tricky, right? Because you don't know, because there's no way that you could know. But you can say, we know this is what we don't know. And then here's our assessment. Here's what we think. You could have a follow-on talk on, there's estimative language in the cyber threat intelligence world. And we have some of the stuff from our CTI summit that will talk about this, where you might say probability of what you think and why you think it. That's helpful, but just make it clear to your stakeholder, no matter who it is, another incident responder on your team, the director of your organization, the CISO, or if it's something that's making it up to the board, that you might help someone out in your career in producing. These are really important things. Come back to Colin Powell on this one. But the definition of a key assumptions check is to question the interpretation of the evidence and the reasoning, and then you tie it back to the externalization of it. You're capturing this stuff so other people can see it. So I did a quick rundown, and I won't go through all of these, but this is just kind of illustrative of what you might do. Is, okay, we're going to do a threat landscape report. What are some of the things that we need to think about, and what are some of our assumptions that we have out there? Well, cyber criminals, we're going to want to include cyber criminals, right? Because they're always looking for financial gain. Well, what about nation state actors or people that are affiliated with nation states? I'll say North Korea as an example. We just saw in February, 3 North Koreans that got indicted for cryptocurrency fraud to help fund the regime there. But maybe you hadn't thought about that or hadn't tracked the news. And you're like, oh yeah, North Korea is going to do that. Are they going to continue to do this? Are they going to stop because of the indictments? What do we think there? The anonymity, that third one's an interesting one there, because when cryptocurrencies first came out, it was Bitcoin. People thought it was anonymous. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Law enforcement has had a lot of fun with that. But then you've had other currencies like Monero that have more privacy and things like that. So the anonymity has been swinging towards more anonymous types of things. The market's going to remain volatile. We saw that with the Coinbase IPO, bubbles and speculation. Interesting on that adoption of the retailers and financial institutions. You're seeing that. I just saw yesterday, I think Venmo is now going to allow cryptocurrency as a form of payment that's there. So this is going, mainstream. So I won't go through the rest of them, but what does this mean? These are the things that we're building it on. And then you might break down each one and say, okay, this is what we think cyber criminals are going to do. And this is what we assumed about it. This is what we think nation states are going to do. Are there other countries doing it that we hadn't thought about just because North Korea has been in the headlines? So you capture this, and then you do a brainstorming session with your colleagues, and you guys can be like, okay, yeah, this one works. Nope, this one doesn't. Oh, we completely missed this one. And then if you're in a world where you're doing an annual report to your employees on the types of incidents that you've had, right? You can review it. Like, here's what we did 12 months ago. Here's the assumptions that we made. Here's the new data that we have. Do we need to update it? But you're capturing it. What I really like about what Dick Hewer says is about the externalization. You're taking what's going on inside your brain and you're externalizing it, but it also helps grow people as well. And it helps people understand the logic on how you got there. And it also helps people understand that there was like some analytical rigor in this thing that you produced, be it a pen test report on a company, be it a threat assessment for a CISO, whatever the case may be. So as I get to kind of wrapping up, kind of key takeaways, a little bit of a summary on the next two slides, right? We all have biases that influence our thinking. Think about what is influencing those decisions and challenge it. I actually, because this has been top of mind for me, I just realized that I had a bias against a colleague on something that came up, and I just like, oh man, here we go again. Turns out that wasn't the case, but I took past it. I Tony Starked it. I took something in the past and just assumed it was going to be the case and validated it, and when in fact it wasn't. So it was nice to have this top of mind. I need to do that more often, I think. Seek out objective sources of information. This is really important. There was a question in Amy's hall room. We were talking about open source intelligence. This is really important when you're doing OSINT work, and that's just not a CTI thing. You'll do OSINT investigations as part of incident response. You don't have to be a threat intel person for it. Don't take anything at face value. Check the hubris, be dispassionate. Now, what I mean there, again, you can be very passionate about your job, but try to keep your emotions even keel, right? You don't want to be going up. You don't want to conversely be going down as best possible. Again, if it's familiar, don't assume that it's the case. Be empathetic towards our colleagues, our peers, our customers. Diversity is so important. And then explore the structured analytical techniques. So a couple things on this one that I would say, if you have masterclass, Neil deGrasse Tyson has done a masterclass on critical thinking, and I think it's a really, really good one. He actually put a section on cognitive bias on here, and he actually has more examples than I went through today. And he talks about how to overcome them, how to reduce it. He also has a blog on it that actually has a little bit more content than what he talks about in the video. But if you want to get better at thinking, I like him. I think he's easy to listen to, right? He's a good speaker. He's entertaining. He has good anecdotes and things like that. He's also I've noticed, very animated with his hands, which kind of cracks me up as I notice I'm doing the same thing. But check that out. That's a good reference. Now, if you happen to have masterclass, check out Aaron Franklin's here. Actually, if I'm being honest, this is the reason that I got masterclass in December, was for this brisket specific chapter in his masterclass. So if you're into brisket, like, this thing is worth the price of admission by itself. And then you can do the stuff that helps you in your career and all that sort of stuff. But remember, I've got to keep Texas brisket going strong. So I learned a lot from this. Now, if you don't have masterclass, it's not the cheapest thing, but you can get a 2-for-1 special every year around Christmas time. So that could be a way to get it, split it with a friend. But on the barbecue front, he has the show that was on PBS and now it's on YouTube, Barbecue with Franklin, and he has a bunch of videos there, and he actually does brisket trimming on that one too. So even if you don't have the masterclass, you have an option there. These are a couple books on critical thinking. The SAT one had that one graphic that had all of the techniques mapped out. That came from there. I was actually excited. I don't know where my book is. It's on the bookshelf over there. This is a new edition. So they've put out a new edition from my edition. And the same thing on the one on the right, critical thinking for strategic intelligence. This one I really like, though. If you ever have to do some executive level presentations or you're writing up assessments, no matter what side you're on, that's a really good one. The table of contents in there would be a nice guide for you. So that's it for me. You know, hook up with me on social media. I've been slacking with some folks that had follow-up questions on CTI in particular, but I'm happy to talk more beyond that. But I think we may have time for some questions.
Yeah, there's a lot to wade through here. A lot of good discussion in here of some of your analogies really hit home, which is pretty awesome. I know that I was remembering little parts of the movies now and again. I'm like, I forgot that one scene. That was kind of cool. Let's see, what are a couple of good ones that we hear on this? Well, let's go to one we had actually in Zoom. Does cognitive bias affect the attribution of attacks as well? Is SolarWinds an example of this, or are we seeing stuff that's based on hard evidence, or do you think that a lot of what happens after the announcement of an attack is going to be based on bias? And I would extend that just a little bit before you get started by saying, I'm interested in your perspective for this, for both the immediacy as well as kind of the longer term after we see some kind of percolation of fact kind of move through the process as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think having been an incident responder in former life, right, and people that do incident response appreciate this, right? You know, you have a certain amount of evidence now, and then a month, this kind of gets to your point, Phil, like a month later, you may have different types of evidence that are there. I think some of that nuance is lost on the general public or the layman there, because whenever these come out, I remember SolarWinds was on a Sunday night. And actually I did a search security article on it with the information that we had, having no clue what was coming later down the line. So I think there's this immediate, and if you look past over the past 10 years, you know, there's like this immediate, oh my gosh, it was Russia. And then we've pivoted to, oh my gosh, it's China. And we have kind of done that. It's an interesting equilibrium. I'd hope we're a little bit better at it, but you know, seeing the news headlines, I don't think that we are. So I would separate what the news says from what analysts say. And as an example, FireEye, you know, they didn't attribute it like they'd done with some of their other threat actor groups at the time, right? UNC or UN, I forgot whatever their convention was for unnamed groups that were out there. So I definitely think there's some confirmation bias that happens in the community, and then certainly beyond the community when it comes to attributions to other countries.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you said that about the difference between media commentary and then professional commentary on that kind of stuff too, because there's certainly some media out there that, at least in my opinion, biased as I'm sure it may be in some ways, is a little bit more adherent to what we would consider an evidence-based approach to reporting versus some that are aiming for eyeballs, clicks, and sensationalism.
100%.
And then, you know, when you see some of the professional stuff come out in terms of the attribution, and then as we get even into the further ends of it, when we see whether it be diplomatic or legal action that gets taken as well, you know, we are left to a degree to assume that a lot of that is based a lot more in factual observation than it is in bias. But you know, it's important for everybody in those little spheres of reporting, as it were, kind of recognize that bias to try and weed that out as best as we can.
100%.
Let's see, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I know there were a couple of good questions that I had flagged, and I am missing those now somehow.
It's tough to keep up with the Slack channels though.
It really is. It's amazing. We got 1,700 people in this channel, and in the overall session as a whole, which is awesome. But holy cow, that's a lot of good comments in here. If you could have only one choice of barbecue for the rest of your life, what would it be? That's a good one.
Ooh, that is a really good one.
Yeah, I asked that question so it can buy me a little bit of time because I knew it was a
Yeah,
difficult question.
yeah, that's such a tough
Scroll
one. I really like tri-tip. My Californian friends have introduced me to
through.
tri-tip. So reverse sear, so reverse sear it, put it on the smoker for 45 minutes to an hour, and then put it on a griddle and sear it at like 500 degrees. I like that because it's like an hour, and I'm hour and a half prep to eating type of thing. Versus brisket, even with the pellet smoker, it takes forever to do brisket. So I mean, I do like brisket, but I think pork belly burnt ends. If I wanted to go like proper barbecue, not like a tri-tip kind of steak thing, I like pork belly burnt ends.
All good choices. Man, now I'm hungry. Tough to do that sometimes. Cool. There, let's see. Oh, here's a good one. So I didn't notice it, but I didn't know if maybe you'd be able to shed light on there. Did you have a Stan Lee Watcher cameo embedded in your slides anywhere?
No, no, I did not. I did put a
Oh,
couple things in there though. I did activate the Winter Soldier for anyone that was paying attention.
I missed that one too. Now we get to go back because we all get the slides in our Summit Access page in the portal account in a little bit. So something to go back to or something to send your colleagues and friends to as well. Very cool. Well, good. There's a couple of other ones that I know you'll probably be able to pick up on and probably answer a little bit more specifically to some of those questions that are in here when you're wading through. But overall, I just want to say thanks very much. I think it's so important for us to take a step back in here in the skills track. And I almost see this as like a meta skill. Like we have to understand how we think and how we operate in order to properly use skills, whether it be tools, techniques, procedures, or whatever. So I think this is really important as well. And you covered so many aspects and facets of that. So um, just I think the only commentary that I would give to our folks in the audience is these observations are the result of many years of doing this. And I know you used to do IMINT when you were in the
Yeah.
military, and certainly that the idea of cultivating an understanding of bias comes over a long period of time. So I don't want anybody to be discouraged by thinking, oh my gosh, I got to worry about all these biases every time I write a single paragraph. It's just more important to understand that bias is there and then kind of approach that with a healthy skepticism and get better over time. And that's really what I think is important to take away for folks in the earlier stages of their career, like we see with a lot of the people in the audience today.
Yeah, you could get super overwhelmed with it. I mean, just a simple thing on brainstorming is on paper, that is a structured analytical technique. Another one that you could do is just a SWOT analysis on something: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. These are, simple ones that you can do. So you don't have to do the day-long workshop type of stuff, which I purposely did not cover. But yeah, there is an easy button into this, but checking your assumptions is a great start for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Well, hey, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your time. I know this was your second of the day. I hope you don't have another talk
No,
because
this is it. All right,
very
thank you.
cool.
I'll be
Hey,
on
thanks, Greg.
I'll go to Slack everybody for follow-ups.
Cool. Thanks much.
All right, see y'all.